There comes a moment in every life when effort stops working. Not because you are lazy, not because you are incapable, but because you are trying to force something that was never meant to be controlled. In the first place, you push harder. You plan more. You analyze every detail. And yet the more you try to take control, the more life seems to slip through your fingers. This is the paradox most people never understand. Control feels safe. It gives the illusion of direction. It convinces you that if you just try a little harder, think a little smarter, or push a little further, everything will finally align. But what if the problem isn't that you're not trying enough? What if the problem is that you're trying too much? Carl Jung once suggested that what we resist persists, and what we fail to understand quietly shapes our destiny. And often, what we are resisting the most is uncertainty. We want guarantees. We want clarity. We want to know that every step we take will lead somewhere meaningful. So we try to control outcomes. We try to control people. We try to control timing. We even try to control how we feel. But the universe does not respond to force. It responds to alignment. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because forcing something is not the same as creating it. Forcing comes from fear. Alignment comes from trust. When you force, you are saying, I don't believe things will work unless I push them. When you align, you are saying, I trust that what is meant for me will unfold, and I will meet it halfway. And yet, trust feels dangerous to most people, because trust requires letting go of certainty, letting go of control, letting go of the constant need to predict what happens next. And that is where the ego begins to panic. The ego thrives on control. It survives by creating structure, identity, and expectations. It tells you that if you don't take control, everything will fall apart. But here's the deeper truth. Most of what you're trying to control is not actually yours to control. You cannot force someone to understand you. You cannot force timing to accelerate. You cannot force life to unfold according to your expectations. And when you try, you create resistance. That resistance shows up as frustration, as anxiety, as that heavy feeling that something just isn't flowing. Have you ever noticed that the more you chase something, the more distant it feels? Opportunities disappear. People pull away. Even your own motivation starts to fade. It's not a coincidence. It's misalignment. Because chasing is rooted in the belief that something is missing. But the universe does not respond to lack. It responds to state. If you move through life feeling incomplete, you will continue to experience situations that reflect that incompleteness. If you move through life feeling grounded, things begin to flow differently. This is why some people seem to attract the right opportunities effortlessly, while others struggle despite working twice as hard. It's not about effort, it's about energy. And this is where the idea of letting the universe guide you begins to make sense. It does not mean doing nothing. It does not mean giving up. It means shifting from force to awareness, from control to connection, from anxiety to presence. Because when you stop forcing life, something unexpected happens. You start noticing. You notice patterns you once ignored. You notice opportunities that were always there. You notice the subtle signals guiding you in a direction you didn't expect. But here's the key. Those signals are quiet. They don't scream. They don't demand attention. They don't compete with the noise of your overthinking. Which means, if your mind is constantly busy trying to control everything, you will never hear them. And this is why stillness becomes powerful. Not because it solves everything instantly, but because it allows you to finally see what was already there. Think about the times in your life when things worked out in a way you couldn't have planned. The unexpected opportunity, the random encounter, the moment where everything just clicked. You didn't force those moments. You met them. And that's the difference. Forcing is trying to bend life to your will. Guidance is learning how to walk with it. And most people never learn this because they are addicted to control. They confuse control with strength. They confuse surrender with weakness. But real strength is not forcing outcomes. Real strength is trusting yourself enough to move forward without needing to control every detail. And that's where the real transformation begins. Because the moment you stop forcing life, life stops resisting you. Part 2, letting go without losing yourself. Letting go sounds beautiful in theory. It sounds peaceful. It sounds freeing. It sounds like the answer to everything that feels heavy in your life. But when you actually try to do it, it feels almost impossible. Because the moment you say, I will let go, a question immediately follows. If I let go, then what do I hold on to? This is where most people get stuck. They believe that letting go means becoming passive, that it means giving up control completely, that it means drifting through life without direction. But that's not letting go. That's disconnection. And there is a difference. Letting go is not about losing direction. It's about releasing the illusion that you were ever fully in control of it. You still move, you still choose, you still act. But the energy behind your actions changes. Instead of acting from fear, you begin to act from clarity. Instead of reacting to everything, you begin to respond with awareness. Instead of forcing outcomes, you begin to follow what feels aligned. And that word, aligned, is everything. Because alignment doesn't mean everything is easy. It means everything makes sense, even when it's challenging. It means your actions feel natural, not forced. It means you're not constantly questioning whether you're doing the right thing. And most importantly, it means you are not abandoning yourself in the process. Because one of the biggest fears people have about letting go is this: if I stop controlling everything, I'll lose myself. But the truth is, most people aren't afraid of losing themselves. They're afraid of discovering that who they've been trying to be was never truly them. So they hold on. They hold on to plans that don't feel right anymore. They hold on to relationships that drain them. They hold on to identities that no longer fit. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. And the ego loves familiarity. Even if it hurts, even if it limits you, even if it keeps you stuck in the same cycle over and over again, because at least it's predictable. And letting go means stepping into the unknown. And the unknown feels like danger, even when it's actually freedom. So how do you let go without losing yourself? You start by shifting what you trust. Right now, most people trust their fears more than their intuition. They trust overthinking more than feeling. They trust logic more than inner knowing. They trust control more than flow. But your intuition doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It doesn't try to convince you. It simply knows. It shows up as a quiet sense of clarity, a feeling that something is right, even if you can't explain why. A subtle pull in a direction that doesn't make logical sense, but feels undeniably true. And here's the problem. Most people ignore it because it doesn't come with guarantees. It doesn't promise immediate results. It doesn't give you a full map of what's going to happen next. It only gives you the next step. And for a mind that wants certainty, that's not enough. So you go back to controlling. You go back to planning everything. You go back to forcing outcomes. You go back to trying to figure everything out before taking action. And in doing that, you disconnect from the very guidance you were looking for, because guidance doesn't work that way. The universe doesn't hand you the full picture. It responds to movement. It responds to trust in action. It meets you when you meet it halfway. This is why clarity often comes after action, not before it. And this is where letting go becomes practical, not abstract, not philosophical, but something you can actually live. Letting go begins with small decisions, not dramatic changes. Small moments where you choose alignment over control, where you choose honesty over comfort, where you choose to listen instead of forcing. It might look like this: saying no to something that doesn't feel right, even if it makes sense on paper. Walking away from a situation that drains you, even if you don't know what comes next. Starting something new, not because you're sure it will succeed, but because you feel called to it. These are the moments where you begin to trust, not blindly, but consciously. And slowly, something starts to change. You feel lighter, not because your problems disappear, but because you're no longer carrying what isn't yours to control. You feel clearer, not because you have all the answers, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. And most importantly, you feel more like yourself, not the version shaped by expectations, not the version driven by fear, but the version that was always there beneath the noise. And this is where life begins to shift. Because when you stop forcing, you start allowing. And allowing doesn't mean waiting. It means being open. Open to change, open to redirection, open to the possibility that the path you imagined was only a small part of something much bigger. And that's when guidance becomes real, not as a concept, but as an experience. You begin to notice how things unfold differently, how the right conversations happen at the right time, how opportunities appear when you least expect them, how clarity comes when you stop chasing it. It doesn't feel random anymore. It feels connected, and that connection is what you were trying to control all along. Part 3. Why forcing life pushes everything away. There is something most people never question. They believe that if they want something badly enough, if they work hard enough, if they push with enough intensity, they will eventually get it. And sometimes That's true. But more often than people realize, the harder you push, the further things move away from you. And it feels unfair. Because from the outside, it looks like effort should be rewarded. You're doing everything right. You're trying. You're showing up. You're putting in energy. So why does it feel like nothing is responding? Why does it feel like life is resisting you? The answer is uncomfortable. Because it has nothing to do with how much you're doing. And everything to do with the energy behind why you're doing it. Forcing comes from tension. It comes from the feeling that something is missing. That something is not enough. That something must happen. Or you will feel incomplete. And that energy creates pressure. Not just internally, but externally. People can feel it. Opportunities react to it. Even your own mind starts to collapse under it. Because pressure doesn't attract. It repels. Think about it. Have you ever chased someone and felt them slowly pull away? Not because they didn't like you, but because something about your energy felt heavy. It felt like expectation. It felt like need. It felt like they had to respond instead of wanting to. That's what forcing does. It turns desire into demand. And the moment something feels like a demand, it loses its natural flow. The same thing happens with life itself. When you force outcomes, you're no longer in relationship with life. You're in conflict with it. You're trying to bend it, control it, rush it. And life doesn't respond well to being rushed because everything has its own timing. Not your timing, not your expectations, it's timing. And this is where most people create resistance without realizing it. They don't see resistance as something they are creating. They see it as something happening to them. They say, things aren't working. Nothing is moving. I feel stuck. But what if you're not stuck? What if you're pushing against something that is asking you to slow down? Because resistance is not always a barrier. Sometimes it's feedback. Feedback that you are out of alignment. Feedback that you are forcing something that isn't ready or isn't right. And instead of listening to that feedback, most people double down. They try harder. They push more. They become more rigid. And in doing so, they increase the very resistance they're trying to break through. It becomes a cycle. The more you force, the more resistance you feel. The more resistance you feel, the more you force, until eventually you burn out. Not because you weren't capable, but because you were moving against the current. And this is the part people misunderstand about effort. Effort is not the problem. Misaligned effort is. There is a difference between inspired action and forced action. Inspired action feels alive. It feels natural. It feels like movement without strain, even when it's challenging. It doesn't drain you the same way, because it's coming from alignment. Forced action feels heavy. It feels like you're dragging yourself forward. It feels like constant resistance. It feels like you have to convince yourself to keep going. And over time, that drains everything out of you. Your energy, your clarity, your motivation. Until you start questioning yourself. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe this just isn't meant for me. But often, it's not about your worth. It's about your approach. Because when you stop forcing, something shifts immediately. The tension drops. The pressure softens. And suddenly, you can breathe again. And in that space, you begin to see things differently. You begin to realize that some things were never meant to be chased. They were meant to be received. But receiving requires openness. And openness cannot exist in a state of tension. You cannot receive while gripping tightly. You cannot receive while constantly trying to control. You cannot receive while operating from fear. And that's why letting go is powerful. Not because it magically brings everything to you, but because it removes what was blocking it in the first place. And here's the deeper truth most people don't want to hear. Sometimes what you're forcing is not meant for you. Not because you're not worthy, but because it doesn't align with who you are becoming. And the more you try to hold on to it, the more life pulls you away from it. Until eventually, you're forced to let go anyway. But by then, you're exhausted. And that's why learning to let go early is a form of intelligence. It saves you from unnecessary struggle. It saves you from misalignment. It saves you from building a life that doesn't actually feel like yours. Because when something is truly aligned, it doesn't require constant force. It requires presence. It requires participation. It requires trust. And yes, it still requires effort, but not the kind that drains you, the kind that moves you. And once you experience that difference, you will never want to go back to forcing again, because you realize something simple but powerful. What is meant for you does not require you to become someone you are not to obtain it. Part 4. Walking with the universe. At some point, you stop asking, how do I control my life? And you begin asking a different question. How do I walk with it? This is where everything changes, because control is exhausting. It requires constant effort, constant thinking, constant tension. But walking with life feels different. It feels lighter. It feels natural. It feels like you are no longer carrying everything alone. And this doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually. Through moments where you choose trust instead of fear. Moments where you choose presence instead of overthinking. Moments where you stop trying to force clarity and allow it to come to you. Because clarity is not something you chase. It's something you create space for. And the universe fills that space when you stop crowding it with noise. This is the shift from effort to flow. Not the absence of effort, but the transformation of it. You still move. You still take action. You still build, create, decide. But now, you are not doing it from a place of pressure. You are doing it from a place of connection. And that connection changes everything. Because when you are connected, you begin to trust timing, even when things don't happen when you want them to. You begin to trust redirection, even when things don't go the way you planned. You begin to trust silence, even when nothing seems to be moving. And this is where most people quit, because they interpret silence as failure. They interpret delay as rejection. They interpret uncertainty as a sign that something is wrong. But what if nothing is wrong? What if life is not delaying you, but preparing you? What if the pause is not punishment, but alignment? Because not everything that comes quickly is meant to stay, and not everything that takes time is meant to be avoided. Some things need space to become what they are meant to be, and that includes you. Because you are not the same person you were before. Every experience, every failure, every moment of confusion has been shaping you, not randomly, but intentionally. And the universe does not respond to who you were. It responds to who you are becoming. That's why some things don't work anymore. That's why some doors close. That's why some paths feel heavy even though they once felt right. Because you've outgrown them. And forcing yourself to stay in something you've outgrown will always feel like resistance. But walking with the universe means recognizing when it's time to move. Not because you have all the answers, but because you feel the shift, a quiet knowing, a sense that something is changing, even if you can't explain it yet. And instead of resisting that feeling, you follow it, gently, without rushing, without needing to prove anything. Because this is not about speed, it's about direction. And direction becomes clear when you are no longer trying to control every step. You begin to trust that you don't need the entire path. You only need to see the next step, and then the next, and then the next. And over time, that path reveals itself. Not all at once, but exactly when you are ready for it. And this is what it means to let the universe guide you. Not to sit and wait, not to give up your power, but to align your actions with something deeper than fear. To move with awareness, to choose with clarity, to act without forcing. Because when you do that, life begins to respond differently. You find yourself in the right places without chasing them. You meet the right people without forcing connections. You feel a sense of calm, even when things are uncertain. And that calm is not because everything is perfect. It's because you are no longer fighting what is. You are working with it. And that is power. Not loud power, not forceful power, but quiet, grounded, unshakable power. The kind of power that doesn't need to prove itself, because it knows. And once you reach that point, you realize something you didn't understand before. Life was never something you were meant to control. It was something you were meant to experience, consciously, to move through, to grow with, to align with. And when you stop forcing, you don't lose your direction. You find it, not as something outside of you, but as something that was always within you, waiting for you to be still enough to hear it. So don't force it. Not the timing, not the outcome, not the path. Just stay present, stay aware. And when the moment comes, move with it. Because what is truly meant for you will not require force, only alignment.